My name is Bison Taylor. I'm the current Chief Operations Officer for the Student Chapter of Energy Resources, and I will be your MC for the rest of the day. We're delighted that you rejoined us after lunch, and as my first contribution to the conference, please allow me to introduce Randall Luthi, the Policy Director for the Office of the Governor of Wyoming. Randall grew up on the family farm and ranch in Freedom, Wyoming, and at UW, he majored in Administration of Justice and went on to law school. Mr. Luthi was awarded the 2024 Distinguished Alumni Award from the University of Wyoming, and also serves as an ex officio member of the Energy Resources Council, the governing body for the School of Energy Resources. There is no one better to introduce our keynote to you other than Randall. Please help me welcome him to the stage.
Appreciate it. Yeah. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you. I know it's difficult after lunch, but we're in for a real treat, not with my introduction, but what comes later. You know, I was asked to do this. I saw that there were 15 minutes allotted for it, and I figured, well, I'll probably take about 3. But, you know, now that I'm up here, I am a retired politician, so I could easily stretch it to 15 minutes, I'm sure, and plus. But it is my absolute privilege to introduce you all to Governor Mark Gordon. Governor Gordon is probably the best example of one of my favorite sayings. If you haven't met the governor of Wyoming, you haven't tried very hard. Because literally, I would bet there is not a community in Wyoming that the governor has not been to during his time in office. Rather that be graduations, rather that be openings of new business, rather that be conventions, and sometimes it's just dropping by Main Street to see how business is going. Governor Gordon was raised on a family ranch near KC, which, just in case you do not know, is a suburb of Buffalo. Okay? So growing up on a working ranch in Wyoming is not a pampered life. But evidently it is one rich with very memorable experiences. So with a little bit of luck and maybe some encouragement from all of you, you just might be able to hear about a few of those experiences today. It could be getting up long before the sun is up and riding miles to gather cows because you needed to get the buck out of your horse before you started moving cattle. It might be an ingenious way to water chickens. It might be watching power poles fall in succession after the first one toppled due to wind and snow. It might be how to get the neighbor's 2,200-pound Charolais bull away from your heifers and into a trailer, all without the benefit of a corral. Or it might be the tale of 2 trucks chained to each other in a vicious tug of war just to see which one really had the most power. Or it might actually be something entirely different. Yep. Our office has an official bio, and the bio tells you that Governor Gordon was reelected in 2022 with 79% of the vote. And coincidentally, he is also varies between the 2nd and 3rd most popular governor in Wyoming. I'm sorry, the most popular governor in the nation, yeah. But you will never hear that from him, because it could sound like bragging. And he believes in say less, but do more. We saw the rest of the Code of the West up earlier today. I can tell you the governor is the Code of the West. Now, Mark Gordon knows well 2 of the foundations of Wyoming's culture and economy, because he's worked in both. He can rope a steer, and he can tell you how to develop your oil and gas field. And not being pampered growing up has actually paid off. Because the governor was forced into one of the biggest economic downturns due to COVID in our history. For the first time since the first oil well was drilled, there were no drilling rigs operating in the entire state. But he found a way to keep the oil field workers here and working. He found a way to open schools sooner than other states, and he helped the economy not only to survive, but eventually thrive. And all the while, he was criticized for doing too much or doing too little. So, also, there's something else that's not in his official biography, and that Mark Gordon is a good neighbor. He understands the land is a multi-generational asset if managed carefully. He is the lesser half of Mark and Jenny Gordon. He is a great boss. That's purely self-preservation. So, yeah, for me, yeah. So I'll say it again. He's a great boss. He loves his children almost as much as he loves his grandchildren. And he feeds the hungry of Wyoming. Please welcome Governor Mark Gordon.
Nicely done. Hey, thank you. Oh, man. You know, I was going to tell you that Randall's a great asset, but I don't know. Randall, that was way too much. Thank you. Thank you very much. He did tell me beforehand that I have to tell you a ranching story or two. And I was trying to figure out how to do that, and I'll give you two, maybe three. But the first one I was going to tell you is there were two bars in KC, which is not a suburb of Buffalo, if anybody knows that. KC it's a time warp, and it's a place of its own, and it is home. It's where I grew up, and it's a lot where I got most of my education was right there on the ranch in KC. But anyway, there were two bars. KC has a rich history in Wyoming. We not only were where the Johnson County War took place, but we also had Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, and if you're a little more recent, and Chris Ledoux, all pretty important parts. But there were two bars. One was the invasion after the Johnson County War, and the other one was called the Hole in the Wall after Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, and they would always have little wars between the two. But anyway, there was a guy named Tex Raper who was just a little short guy, and he always was in the bar, and he used to refer to how, you know, it was time the amateur hours were over, and let, you know, when all the amateurs clear out, that's when the real drinking begins. He was such a professional at that they said, well, you know, Tex, maybe you should just be the bartender, and you can handle it. So Tex was the bartender when Robert Redford, who had just filmed Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, showed up to do a special for National Geographic on the Outlaw Trail. Now, in KC, there's quite a bit of discussion about whose bridle he rode with, or what saddle he was on, or who had the saddle blanket, or whatever that is. But when they came in, and Robert Redford walked in, and Tex and Robert were about the same size, pretty short, Tex said, well, what do you want? Just about like that. And Robert Redford apparently said, well, I'd like a whiskey and water. So Tex set him up a whiskey and a water. And Robert Redford said, well, I'd kind of like those mixed. And Tex, in his wonderful KC style, said, you got two hands, mix it yourself. And so that's the kind of education that I got. But it is such a wonderful thing to be here with the combined classes, and really an incredibly important topic that is absolutely correct for the University of Wyoming to lead absolutely correct for the state of Wyoming to lead, and absolutely important for our country to be able to get this right. The nexus between agriculture, natural resource management, and developing our natural resources for the benefit of all is something that this state can do better than anywhere else. You know, in talking with folks here today, some wonderful students at lunch, they were reflecting, and I think somebody might have mentioned a little earlier, Mike Sullivan said Wyoming's a small town with very long streets. And that is true. You have a chance to meet everybody, and it is really great. And I will say this is one of our biggest advantages. For being so small and being so close as a community, you can get more things done in Wyoming than you can anywhere else. And it's a strength that we should absolutely embrace. I think it is why we are able to punch well above our weight. I think that's why you've seen this state be the first to have a stable token. I think it's the first state that actually has looked at new types of being able to incorporate under different, we were first to have LLCs, we're the first to have DUNAs, first to have all of these things, because we have a legislature, for the most part, that can get along with the executive branch, understand their roles and what the complexities are, and actually respect the citizens when they show up, and will listen to them. So when you put all of that together and you start thinking about how do we develop these resources in a way that is mindful of the assets, so we don't ever want to see things get wrecked in Wyoming, that is careful in the way we develop it and is respectful of the landowners, whoever they may be, that's something you can talk about here in Wyoming. And I used to work for Apache Corporation, and I can tell you it wasn't always the case in Texas, and it wasn't always the case in Oklahoma. Wyoming, we tend to do things a little better. Sometimes we get a little bit ahead of ourselves, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. But when you think about what you are all talking about here, and the importance of integrity, the importance of doing what you say you're going to do, and the importance of listening respectfully to one another, to understand that unfortunately in this day and age, where everything seems binary, it's either yes or no, we actually in Wyoming carry that American tradition of, well, let's see what we can get done. Let's see if we can make it a little better. And I'm going to give you a couple of things that are particularly important, I think, for most people in Wyoming. And I think they apply incredibly strongly to energy industry. I think they apply to the ranching industry. And I think they apply just to what it means to be a Wyoming person. I don't know anyone in this state who doesn't love a morning sunrise, who doesn't love the ability to see pronghorn out on the prairie or have the elk in the fall bugle. I don't think there's anyone who doesn't think that we can develop our energy resources, grow the food that's necessary for all of us, and do that in a way that is going to make sure that we continue to have our grandkids hear those sounds, see those sounds, and wake up. And if you were like me, we left the barn about 2 o'clock in the morning. Randall was going to tell you a little bit about this. We left the barn about 2 o'clock in the morning. It was miserable to be 6 years old on a fat little horse and heading out 9 miles, and it was because Dad didn't want the horses to buck when they got to the cattle. You know, son, we're going to make sure that every horse is ridden down by the time we have to get the work started. That is not fun when you're 6 years old. But when you saw that sun come up and you felt the cold coming in behind you and kind of seeping in under your coat, but then you'd see the sun come over the hill and you'd see people on each one of the little ridges, and they all had the same job to do. And then suddenly that warmth of the sun would come to you. and you realized you were in God's country. It was a beautiful morning, a great time to do things. And I think that's exactly where we are now. This is a time that has more challenges, but more tools that we can use to address those challenges, as long as we keep our direction and our view right. If we don't get sucked into the they're bad, we're good, or you can't do that, that's the right thing to do. And we can understand that there are, in Wyoming, every sort of energy source that you can possibly imagine. We're even starting to see a little more geothermal. Now, not every energy source is right for that particular place, and I think as you discuss what that's going to look like, think about that, both in terms of today, both in terms of land ownership and opportunities, but also in terms of what you want to see down the road. And that's what I think has been particularly problematic about our regulatory scheme. Over the last 50 years or so, when we started with remarkably insightful good laws, and I know this is going to sound strange, but NEPA was a hell of a good law. To just sit there and say, what could possibly go wrong with the Alaska pipeline? It worked because of NEPA. Now, that was at a time when you could actually get things done in an orderly fashion. Right here in Wyoming, 12 years just to get a power line sited, 12 years. 16 years, and it's not quite built yet, 16 years from concept to approval, and now you're just starting construction. Our country can't do that. But if you look at what's happened with the legal challenges and other things that have gone on with almost every piece of our environmental regulation, from where they started to where they are today, they have turned into recipes for not doing anything. It is almost a banana type of thing. Build absolutely nothing anywhere near anybody. Now, what I'm going to put forward to you is that the people in this room, the people in this state, the developers and the landmen, the ranch owners and others, have a habit of trying to get things done. We're not so much interested in what you can't do. We're much more interested in saying aspirationally, what is it you'd like to see? We want to see those beautiful sunrises. We want to have that good clean air. We want to make sure that we have water resources that work. We want to make sure that we have abundant energy, but it's not going to cost too much. We want to make sure that our children have places to live and grow up. You can't do that if you're saying everything sucks. What we need to do, and what can be started right here, is to talk about, okay, we're going to develop oil and gas. How do we do that in a way that protects those wildlife corridors? And my friend Steve Dagenfelder's there, and I know we've had this conversation, but I think both of us agree, better done in Wyoming than by some heavy hand in DC. And we have been 20 years trying to figure out how to make some of these things work. If you involve stakeholders, if you involve Wyoming people and you involve the policymakers at a level that is an honest conversation, carefully brokered and thought through, not everybody's going to agree about everything, but we can make it work here in Wyoming. And it's going to work in a way that assures that we protect the things that are most valuable for our state. So I encourage you, as you work on all of this, to remember, this is a great country not because of what we told ourselves we couldn't do, but because of what we said we could do. And I'll give you a couple of examples that I think are really interesting. The Thunder Basin is a part of the Forest Service. It's all grassland. So what does the Forest Service have to do with grasslands? Well, they don't really know what to do with it, but there are a lot of prairie dogs out there. And so they're trying to figure out how to do that. Along comes, a pretty important play for natural resources, oil and gas. Along comes sort of checkerboarded land with state and federal parcels. The federal parcels get complicated because the BLM run the minerals, but the Forest Service runs the surface. People have grazing leases. They have all of these various things. And then on top of that, you have the Endangered Species Act, sage grouse, and other aspects. So you could have all kinds of people salivating over the policy implications of what this could be. But the landowners in the area, from NGOs to hard right to just good people that have moved there, to the agency folks, including our Game and Fish and others, got together and formed this crazy organization that I can never pronounce correctly, TBUGPA, which is the Thunder Basin National Grassland Prairie Ecosystem Association. And if you look at what they've been doing over the last several years, they've been pulling together to say, we care about the resource in our houses. We understand that there's got to be natural resource development. We don't like the prairie dogs, but we understand there's some federal regulations, so we're pretty angry about those. But for the developers of those natural resources, it's important that we protect both the sage grouse habitat and some of the others. That conversation has been successful. That conversation has allowed things to happen. And it didn't happen because the federal government said it was going to. It didn't even happen because the state government said. It happened because people on the ground respected each other, came together, and understood that we had to bury some hatchets in order to make progress. I think that's the sort of thing that we can do in Wyoming. It's the thing we're doing over in Jonah. It's the thing we're doing all across the West to really make sure that Wyoming's most precious resources are all safeguarded. So let me take a little bit of a direction differently now, because I think the point's been made that Wyoming is a place that you can get things done. And we do it right, and our example can serve as a great example for the rest of the country. I think we're at an incredible crossroads now. If you've watched as national policies have oscillated between we like fossil fuels to we hate fossil fuels to we like fossil fuels to we hate fossil fuels, and all that time, all of the really important infrastructure that is going to expedite whatever you're going to try to do is moldering because it takes too long to get things done. Now, Obama's reelect was the narrowest reelection that had ever happened. He was the first president in our history to win his reelect by less than he won his first election. Since that time, we've gone from Trump to Biden to Trump. And all that time, they were trying to build a power line out of Carbon County. All that time, we were trying to make sure that Kemmerer, the coal resources in Kemmerer, could be continued to be used. And all that time, we haven't built a refinery in the country. Now, there's been other things that have happened, but here's what we've been able to do in Wyoming. We were able to get the first nuclear plant permitted, and it's now currently being built ahead of anybody else. The TerraPower plant is a whole new generation of power. It is incredible. It's got an efficiency of better than 75% for the fuel use. TRISO, which is also another new type of fuel, is also very exciting. It's not quite as efficient, but it can be used in smaller reactors. This has brought a whole new opportunity set to one of our most important minerals, uranium. Now, I think a lot of people worry that, oh goodness, if we have uranium, that means we're not going to be able to have coal, and maybe it's going to be problematic for natural gas. Maybe it's going to be problematic for oil. But the fact of the matter is, and I'll tell you another ranching story. We irrigate our meadows every summer. And Dad finally hired an irrigator from Iowa. And he said, Mark, I'd like you to take him out and show him how to irrigate all these pastures. So we've got, a few hundred acres under irrigation. They all have canals that go through them and ditches. And so I was trying to talk this guy through how you set your dams, and here's the gated pipe, here are the things you can do. And I walked him from the bottom of the place all the way up to the top, and we got to the head gate where we get the water out of the creek, and he said, "Oh, so it's that easy? You just open that one valve and it all works?" Which was pretty silly if you think about it, because it's just an amazing amount of land. The reason I tell that story is that we have an abundance of energy sources, but we need to know where they go and the best ways they fit together. And I think this is one of the challenges that's going to require real work on the part of the next generation of policymakers. We're going to have to understand that just going whole hog on wind is going to make people react in a way that says no more. If we build things in a way that is not respectful of neighboring landowners, we're going to hear about that as well. So Wyoming has this incredible abundance of energy. And now we're seeing data centers and AI showing up on our borders. Nationally, you're hearing a lot of talk about where they're bad. They use water. They're terrible on ratepayers' rates and so on. I am sure many of those stories are true. But here in Wyoming, we have an opportunity, because of the access we have to government, we have the opportunity to sit down and say, we are living with a regulatory scheme that was designed in the last century. We now have a plethora of energy sources. The demand that's going to come from these data centers is absolutely mammoth. But the water resource is something we care about. Is there a way to problem solve on this? Can we do something that isn't going to use water? Is there something that we can do to minimize the footprint on the landscape? Is there something we can do to make sure that our ratepayers are not affected by these huge loads that are coming? So if we can get through those, or any other issue that we set up and talk through, and then we say, this is going to be huge demand, we have huge, this is like that supply and demand equation that's going to be incredibly valuable for Wyoming's future. We make our money off severance taxes. How do we supercharge the use of those severance taxes? That's really the opportunity set that we have here. So when people start talking about that's a bad thing, let's not do it. Let's start listening about what that could mean and start problem solving, which is what NEPA was initially intended to do. And I'm not talking about spending all kinds of time sort of hashing over issues and so on. But there are so many things that we in this generation, with the tools that we have today, can fix, that we should never say no. We should never say let's stop unless there's a really good reason. And maybe when we think about that, and maybe we say, okay, with this mix, how do we use it? How do we make sure it's reliable 24/7? How do we make sure our ratepayers are protected? How do we make sure all of these things come together? That's what we can do here at the state. That's the group that is assembled here, and that's the access that we have. And lastly, when we think about what AI is, there's a lot of conversation about how AI is going to revolutionize everything. So far, AI has done nothing to affect employment rates. I know you hear a lot of terrible stories and AI-mageddon and all that sort of stuff. But the fact of the matter is that we're evolving. We're learning to use it. Now, we need to be wise about how we do that. My daughter, who got her master's here, was just an absolute whiz at Python. And now she says, I just put that into AI and I can get a much better product than I could ever draft on my own. But you have to know what you're looking for, and you have to understand what it is that that model is developing so you know how to value check it. So for the students in this room, this is going to be tough for you because it is going to be easier to do like we do with our phones, try to get from here to McDonald's and put it in there. But we have to be able to understand what it is we're getting. That's the value of education. And that's the value you're going to get from the University of Wyoming. So at the end of all of this, 2 stories. The first is Gary Kasparov played Big Blue in chess many, many years ago. Big Blue was successful and beat Gary Kasparov, the best chess player at the time. And everybody said computers are going to take over the world. What was really interesting was part 2 of that story, which is the next year Gary Kasparov came back with his own computer. And he beat the pants off Big Blue. That didn't make the news quite the same way. But the point is that data is valuable. How we use data is also valuable, and it can be synthesized. So that gives you tactical advantages, but it doesn't give you the strategy, which is what a university can give you. So when we think about how these tools are going to be meshed into what our future looks like, thinking about it in terms of strategically being able to move forward, that's going to be the key. And I hope it all starts here, because this is a great school. We have never said, well, it's either this or that. We've said, let's figure out how we can do it better. Let's figure out the ways we can make it a more valuable education. So the last that I'd show you was something I saw this morning, which I thought was really funny when we think about the advent of technology. In Germany, apparently, there were a couple of pigs that got out on a college campus. And pretty soon, here comes a little robot. And it hustles the pigs off the campus. And as the pigs are leaving, the little robot is doing this very politely. So thank you very, very much. This is a great, great conference. The things you're learning are just remarkable. The conversations I've had have been incredible. And I hope this afternoon's conversations are also going to be exciting, because that's where the rubber meets the road, so to speak. With that, all I would say is ride for the brand. Thanks.